Hi everyone. I have just finished streaming Wuthering Waves for about 7 hours, and there are a lot of things on my mind as the game just came out, but I definitely noticed a few things that need immediate attention, and I would like to give you my very early impressions of the game. There are a lot of issues with the game. I personally think that it will hinder the general opinion on the game as first impressions matter the most, especially for the people who are just trying to get into the game for the first time and they do not know anything about Wuthering Waves, and even more when it is trying to be a direct competitor towards Hoyoverse. I want to preface this video that these are just very early impressions of the game and not overall opinion, as I only reached around Union level 11, and again, as I said, I played the game for about 7 hours on stream. With that out of the way, let's start with the good. The game feels smooth, traversal feels very nice and fast. It's not a sleep fest when you're trying to explore. The grapple feels also very good. It's a very nice, handy feature. It feels very similar to Monster Hunter Rise, which is a good thing, I like that. However, the main thing that makes this game stand out is its combat. And honestly, the combat is probably the best thing about this game, and I absolutely love it. I had a little bit of trouble understanding everything, but as soon as I got into the tutorials, I got the so-called eureka moment. Everything kind of clicked and it felt even better ever since. It's tiny bit complex, it's very fast and snappy, and it just generally feels very, very good. Another thing I really enjoyed are the graphics. The textures are very nice, especially in the tutorial areas, they're very detailed. It does have some issues, but I will get into that a little bit later. Another thing I liked, again, this is very subjective. For me, this is a plus. For some, it might not be, but it is the aesthetic and the music of the game. It's very pretty, very mature, very pleasant to look at, and it's very unique, I would say. Next, we have the UI. For all it's worth, it is very snappy. It feels good to navigate in. As I am on mouse and keyboard, it felt really nice and smooth, but I did find a few things that I also dislike within it, and it just has some inconsistencies. Again, I will get to that in the later section. Other than the UI, the bosses. The bosses are fantastic. Parry mechanics are top-notch. You feel like you have such an incredible power, and unleashing moves at correct times feel very satisfying, and they have weight to them. So you actually feel the impact. I would say the boss designs are one of the best parts about the combat of this game, if not the best part. Okay, so now let us get into the things that are not great and definitely do not serve as a good first impression for the game. First things first, it would be the performance. I personally didn't have much trouble, luckily, but I know lots of my friends and many more people have frame drops and textures bugging out, being grainy and whatnot, or the game just jittering constantly. The only times I've actually noticed some kind of a performance issue was when I was streaming. It felt a little bit laggy and I had a few frame drops in certain areas of the map, especially with more enemies or just a lot of more terrain, I guess. And while we are talking about performance and frames, I do not understand why the game is locked to 60 FPS. I remember the game having a 120 FPS feature in the beta, so a lot of people, including me, are kind of disappointed that 120 FPS is not available on launch. With all of the performance issues at hand, though, maybe they were aware of all of the bugs and performance issues, even on the high-end PCs, and decided to keep the FPS locked to 60 so it doesn't actually blow up people's PCs. Oh, and also I forgot to mention, we are completely missing a borderless feature for some reason. Aside of the performance, I personally had issues with the mouse camera. I will try my best to explain it. So it was basically the very first thing I noticed because it happened as soon as I loaded into the game. The camera is just way too slow. It feels like something is slowing down the mouse. And upon looking up what people are saying on the internet, some people on Reddit are saying that it might be an issue with mouse acceleration being turned on in the code. So I put the camera to 100% and it still felt way too stiff and slow, and almost barely felt like a difference between any of the numbers in the options. Aside of the camera, the game just sometimes bugs out. For example, in my very first tutorial boss, I had my UI completely disappear and my audio muffled, not being able to do anything. I somehow managed to beat the boss, but I couldn't get to the main menu or anything. The only solution was for me to just restart the game completely, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get my UI back to work again. I will let this clip speak for itself. Okay, I see. A new resonator has joined. Press team to switch. Wait, it doesn't work. What is going on? What is going on? Huh? Hello? After playing for a couple of hours, this bug happened to me again, only to realize that the issue is because of my keyboard layout being set to the Czech language. And me trying to press the 1, 2, 3 buttons were considered as something else, and thus this bug is happening. As soon as I switched to the English layout, it was fine and fixed. It never happened ever again. But it definitely ruined my first impression of the tutorial, as I couldn't even properly finish the basic swapping mechanic. Aside of bugs, for the entire time of playing for 7 hours, I have crashed once. Maybe surprising to some, maybe not, but I do have a pretty decent PC, so this shouldn't be happening, I would say. Well, at least it was only once. What's the oh, well, it's level 25. Lag? No shot, I just crashed, right? Client game has crashed. Haha! There is no way that just happened. Oh my god. One thing I gotta say is the graphic terrain, while it is pretty, the pop in from afar is quite noticeable and doesn't really look pretty. Here is the prime example if you're gliding, but not as noticeable when you're on the ground. Remember I said I think the UI is good and snappy? Well, it also has its bad sides. I personally do not enjoy with the type of font that they went with, but my issue is that when there is a dialogue and it is very long, sometimes the text doesn't scroll all the way down, making it look very jank. I did find out later that if you're on mouse and keyboard and you hold the Alt button, then hover your mouse over the text and use the scroll wheel, it will actually sometimes scroll the text so you can see it, but it should be moving on its own. It feels like some parts of the UI, especially in the localization department, just feel unfinished. And speaking of localization, I have heard from many people, including my friends, that in the ENVA, the crew refers to you as him when you're playing as female rover, for example. General voiceover is just very subjective, really, so I will not comment on that. However, I did notice that even on the JP voiceover, the mixing on the audio feels kind of off, and some of the S's feel way too sharp and strong, sometimes hurting my ears. I have personally switched to the JP as soon as possible, but I found a Reddit thread seeing people complain about how the ENVA mispronounced the Chinese names differently quite often. And that would be everything as to what I have noticed or I had some thoughts on. In conclusion, I believe Kuro will fix most of these issues in the future, but they should not exist in the first place. Especially when you're trying to compete with Hoyoverse. You need to hold a high standard. And I'm aware that 1.0 of Genshin also had its issues too, I'm not saying it didn't. But this game feels like it released a tiny bit early and needed some more time in the oven. It sorta just feels like an open beta, not going to lie. But then on the other hand, I'm one of the lucky ones who had almost no issues with the game and just love the combat so much it keeps me playing. Anyways, I shall quit yapping now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!